Hello and welcome to Cooking with Miss Michelle. Today I'm going to show you how to make pretzels two ways. So I have my pretzel recipe in this cookbook I've had since I was a kid. And I'm going to try making the regular recipe, and I'm going to show you how to do it with the sourdough starter that we made in the last video. So I'm going to show you the regular way in case you want to do it before your sourdough starter is ready, and then you can try it again in 5 days after your sourdough starter is done. So I just washed my hands. You should too before you start. And then the next step is I want to preheat my oven to 425. So I'm going to do that now. And then when my pretzels are done, my oven will be warm. So I will post this recipe separately so you have it. The first step is to dissolve 1 tablespoon of yeast in a half a cup of warm water. So I want to make sure to use warm water, not hot water, because hot water will kill my yeast, but warm water will help activate the yeast and wake the yeast cells up. So 1 packet should be 1 tablespoon. So I'm just going to dump that in. And then my next ingredient is 1 teaspoon of honey. If you don't have honey, you can substitute sugar. Yeast needs some kind of sugar or honey to feed on. Okay, so I have my teaspoon of honey. Now I need a teaspoon of salt. But, oh no, I just got my teaspoon all sticky with honey. So I am going to use my half teaspoon and add 2. So 1, 2. So here's my yeast dissolved in the water. Give it a smell. It smells really interesting. I'm gonna add that. I'm going to make sure to scrape off the sides of my measuring cup here. Now I need 1 1/3 cups of flour. So when I measure my flour, I want to make sure I have a full cup, but not overflowing. So I can use a knife, or in this case I'll use a fork, to level it off so it's flat. So I have exactly 1 cup here. I'm going to add that in. And then I need another 1/3 of a cup. Alright, and that is the whole recipe. So I'm going to mix that together. Make sure everything's mixed in really well. Okay, now I'm going to knead this on a cutting board. So kneading is when you use your hands to mix up your dough really well. So I want to get it most of the way mixed so it doesn't spill all over the place when I dump it onto my cutting board. Then I can put the dough on my cutting board. And I'm going to use my clean hands to make sure all the stuff sticks together. And get my dough into one ball. Okay, so I'm just going to try to gather everything back in here. Sometimes when you knead dough, it might be a little bit too sticky, and you can sprinkle a little bit of flour onto your cutting board so it won't stick. This dough seems just right, so I don't need to do that. But if I was making bread or something else, then that might be a good trick that I might use. Okay, so that dough is ready. Now I'm gonna show you how to do it with the sourdough. Okay, so now I'm gonna make sourdough pretzels. So I have my sourdough starter, my 58-year-old sourdough starter that I'm gonna use. So my sourdough starter, it already has yeast, water, and flour. So I'm just gonna adjust the recipe a little bit. So the recipe calls for 1 1/3 cups of flour. So I'm gonna use a cup of the sourdough starter. And then I'm gonna add an additional 1/3 of a cup of flour. And I will leave out the yeast and water. And if I decide it needs a little bit more water, I can add some later. I'm just gonna compare it to this dough and see how it does, but usually you can make a recipe into a sourdough recipe by just substituting 1 cup of flour for 1 cup of sourdough starter and leave out the yeast, and depending on how much water is in there, you'll have to either leave it out or possibly add a little bit. So I have my flour, yeast, and water, so I just need to add my honey and my salt. My honey or sugar. If you don't have honey, you can always just use sugar instead. And I'm gonna do 2 half teaspoons of salt. All right, so I'm gonna mix up this dough. And my oven is ready. Okay, that seems pretty good. It's a little bit stickier than my last dough. So I'm gonna sprinkle a little bit of flour onto my cutting board to knead this dough so it doesn't get too sticky. I don't need much, just enough to cover the surface. Okay, that is really sticky, so I'm actually gonna add a little bit more flour. I'm just gonna knead that in there to mix it up. So I would say use 1 cup of sourdough starter and 2/3 cups of flour with this recipe. You need a kind of a long piece, so you can kind of roll and pinch it out. And the dough will want to snap back, so you'll have to roll it out a few times. And then I'm actually going to twist one end over itself, twist it, and then connect the ends. Oh, this one's a little bit too small, but I'll try it with the sourdough. All right, so I want to roll it out and stretch it. So I want to put one end over the other, twist it, and then connect the ends back down to the bottom. So I can make these any size. I personally think it's more fun to make the letters. So I can make the letter J, the letter N. I can try to make some other shapes if I want. And when my pretzels are ready, I can put them onto my baking sheet. And then I'm gonna brush them with a little bit of egg. So a good way to crack an egg without spilling it is to just crack it on the bottom of your bowl and then open it up. Make sure there's no eggshells in there. I'm gonna mix it up with a fork. Then I'm just gonna take a little bit and brush it onto my pretzels. And then I can sprinkle it with a little bit of salt. Now, if you have coarse salt, that is the best, but I do not, so I'm just gonna use regular salt. It should do just fine. So I'm gonna try some with salt, and then I'm actually gonna try a couple with some Parmesan cheese and see how that works. Alright, so once these are ready, I'm just gonna bake these in the oven at 425 for 10 minutes. Okay, cut. Alright, sounds like they're done. Let's check them out. And there's my pretzels. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll make some delicious pretzels at home.